The British royal family is worth $28 billion. Except they're not. They can't sell Buckingham Palace. They don't own the crown jewels. And most of their wealth? It belongs to the nation, not them. So how rich are they really? And more importantly, who actually owns what? Welcome back to Past to Profit, where history meets money. When people talk about royal wealth, they usually throw around massive numbers. 28 billion, 40 billion, hundreds of billions. But here's the problem with those numbers. They're almost all wrong. Because royal wealth isn't like normal wealth. It's a complicated web of state property, private estates, constitutional arrangements, and centuries-old legal structures that most people, including most British citizens, don't actually understand. So let's break it down piece by piece, separate what the royals actually own from what they control, and figure out what the British monarchy is really worth. Because the answer is far more interesting than the headlines suggest. To understand royal wealth, you need to understand that there are essentially 4 categories of assets associated with the British royal family. The Crown Estate, which belongs to the nation. The Duchy of Lancaster and Duchy of Cornwall, which are private estates but bound by medieval law. Personal private wealth, which is actually owned by individuals in the family. And then there's everything else that people think the royals own, but they actually don't. Let's start with the biggest and most misunderstood category, the Crown Estate. This is a property portfolio worth about £15.6 billion, roughly $20 billion. It includes some of the most valuable real estate in Britain. Regent Street in London, huge swaths of commercial property, massive amounts of farmland, coastal seabeds, and even the entire seabed around England, Wales, and Northern Ireland out to 12 nautical miles. Sounds impressive, right? Except here is a critical detail that most people miss. The royal family doesn't own any of it. Not 1 square foot. The Crown Estate belongs to the reigning monarch in their official capacity as sovereign, but it's not their personal property. It's held in trust for the nation. The monarch can't sell it, can't profit from it directly, and if the monarchy were abolished tomorrow, the Crown Estate would simply remain property of the British state. So why does everyone think the royals own it? Because of history and tradition. The Crown Estate was originally the personal property of British monarchs going back centuries. Kings and queens owned vast amounts of land, and they used the revenue from that land to fund the government, the military, basically everything. But in 1760, King George III made a deal with Parliament. He was drowning in debt, so he surrendered all the revenue from the Crown Estate to the Treasury in exchange for the government taking over his debts and paying him a fixed annual income called the civil list. That arrangement has continued ever since, with modifications over the years. Today, the Crown Estate generates about £400 million a year in profit. All of that money goes directly to the UK Treasury, which is to say, the British government. The royal family doesn't see a penny of it directly. Instead, they receive something called the sovereign grant, which is currently set at 25% of Crown Estate profits, though it recently increased temporarily to fund renovations of Buckingham Palace. So in a typical year, the Crown Estate makes £400 million. The government keeps $300 million, and the royal family gets about £100 million to cover official duties, staff salaries, travel, property maintenance, and everything else related to running the monarchy as an institution. That's not personal income. That's operational funding, like a budget for a government department. Now let's talk about the Duchy of Lancaster. This is where things get more personal. The Duchy of Lancaster is a private estate that's been associated with the reigning monarch since 1399. This portfolio includes commercial properties, farmland, and investment holdings spread across England and Wales. Here's the key difference. The Duchy of Lancaster actually does provide private income to the monarch. The current portfolio generates about £24 million a year in income, and that money goes directly to King Charles III personally. It's used to fund his private expenses, the activities of other family members who aren't covered by the sovereign grant, and essentially acts as the monarch's personal salary. It's private income, but not private property in the normal sense. It's a medieval legal arrangement that's survived into the modern era. Then there's the Duchy of Cornwall, which works almost identically but belongs to the Prince of Wales rather than the monarch. This estate is worth about £1 billion, roughly $1.3 billion, and it generates annual income of around £24 million. When Charles was Prince of Wales, this income funded his official and private activities. Now that he's king, this income goes to Prince William, the new Prince of Wales. The Duchy of Cornwall owns farmland, residential properties, commercial real estate, and even the Oval Cricket Ground in London. Like the Duchy of Lancaster, it's technically held in trust. Prince William benefits from the income, but he can't sell the assets or keep them if he ever stopped being Prince of Wales. It's wealth tied to a title, not to a person. Now we get to the interesting part: actual personal wealth. This is property and assets that individual members of the royal family genuinely own outright and could theoretically sell if they wanted to. For King Charles, this includes Balmoral Castle in Scotland and Sandringham Estate in Norfolk, both inherited from Queen Elizabeth II. These properties are worth an estimated combined £300 to £500 million. He also has personal investments, art collections, jewelry, and other assets that are genuinely private. Queen Elizabeth II, before her death, was personally worth an estimated £370 million according to most credible estimates, though some sources claimed higher. That wealth included her private property, investments built up over 70 years as monarch, personal jewelry distinct from the crown jewels, her stamp collection which was reportedly worth millions, and her stud farm for breeding racehorses. But here is where it gets complicated again. Even some of what seems like personal wealth isn't really theirs. Take the crown jewels, for example. The coronation crown, the royal scepter, the imperial state crown with its 3,000 jewels. All of that is owned by the state, not the royal family. It's held in trust for the nation and can never be sold. The same goes for most of the art in the royal collection, which includes paintings by Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Rembrandt. The collection is worth billions, but it doesn't belong to the royal family personally. It belongs to the nation, held in trust by whoever is monarch. Even Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, Windsor Castle, and most of the famous royal residences don't belong to the family. They're owned by the Crown Estate or held in trust by various royal trusts and foundations. The royal family lives in them and uses them for official purposes, but they can't sell them or rent them out or even redecorate without approval. So when you add it all up, what's the royal family actually worth? If we're talking about personal wealth that could theoretically be liquidated and divided up, it's probably somewhere between £500 million and £1 billion for the senior royals combined, with the bulk of that concentrated in King Charles's hands. That's still an enormous amount of money by any normal standard, but it's nowhere near the $28 billion figure that gets thrown around in headlines. The confusion comes from mixing state assets with personal assets, counting things the royals control but don't own, and including property that's held in trust and can never be sold. It's like saying the President of the United States is a billionaire because they live in the White House and have access to Air Force One. They use those things, but they don't own them. But here is what makes the British royal family's wealth truly unique and arguably more powerful than simple ownership: access without burden. They live in palaces they don't have to maintain with their own money. They travel in luxury they don't personally pay for. They have security, staff, and resources funded by the state. And they benefit from centuries of accumulated art, jewelry, and treasures that remain associated with the institution of monarchy, even though they don't personally own most of it. In many ways, this arrangement is better than ownership. Ownership comes with taxes, maintenance costs, market risk, and the burden of management. The royal family gets the benefit of using some of the most valuable property and assets in Britain without most of the financial downsides. It's access to wealth rather than ownership of wealth, and that's a powerful position to be in. Now let's talk about the controversial part. How much does all this cost British taxpayers? The sovereign grant, which funds the official duties of the monarchy, was around £86 million in the most recent accounting year. That includes salaries for staff, maintenance of occupied royal palaces, official travel, and state events. With the temporary increase for Buckingham Palace renovations, it's been higher in recent years, but that's the baseline. Critics point out that £86 million a year is a lot of money to spend on one family, especially in a democracy. Supporters counter that the monarchy generates far more in tourism revenue, that the Crown Estate contributes £400 million to the Treasury, while the monarchy only costs £86 million. and that you can't really put a price on tradition and national identity. The truth, as usual, is more complicated. Tourism studies show mixed results about how much the royal family actually adds to UK tourism revenue. Some tourists come specifically for royal-related attractions. But would they stop coming if Britain became a republic? France has more tourists than Britain, and they got rid of their monarchy over 200 years ago. Versailles is still a huge draw without a king living in it. The economic argument is further complicated by the fact that the crown estate would still exist and generate revenue even without a monarchy. The properties wouldn't disappear. They'd just be managed as state assets explicitly rather than as crown assets technically. So the £400 million the crown estate generates isn't really because of the royal family. It's because of valuable property that Britain owns regardless of its constitutional structure. But economics aside, the real question is about what the monarchy represents and whether that's worth the cost. And that's not a financial question. It's a political and cultural one that British society continues to debate. So to answer the original question, how rich is the British royal family really? If you're measuring personal, privately owned wealth that could be liquidated tomorrow, probably somewhere between 500 million and £1 billion for the senior royals combined, with King Charles personally worth around 500 million. If you're measuring the total value of assets they control or have access to, including the crown estate, the duchies, and the royal collection, you get into the tens of billions. But most of that isn't really theirs to own or sell. The British royal family exists in a unique financial space that doesn't map neatly onto how we normally think about wealth. They have immense privilege, access to extraordinary resources, and benefits that money often can't buy. But in terms of pure personal wealth, they could spend however they wanted. They're rich, very rich by any normal standard, but they're not even close to being among the wealthiest people in Britain, let alone the world. The Saudi royal family has more personal wealth in a single generation than the British royal family has accumulated in 1,000 years. The Thai king is personally worth more than the entire British royal family combined. Even some British billionaires like James Dyson or the Duke of Westminster have more personal wealth than King Charles. The British monarchy's real asset isn't money. It's legitimacy, tradition, institutional stability, and access to resources without the burden of ownership. That's a different kind of wealth, one that can't be measured in dollars or pounds, but it's arguably more durable and more valuable than a simple bank balance. And that's the real answer to how rich they are. Rich enough to never worry about money, but not rich enough to ever really own what they have. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and on Past to Profit, we'll show you where to look.